Hi, everyone. I'm here with Zach M. Davis, who has he had a big impact on me when I was learning about autogynephilia. Um, he writes this blog called "The Scintillating but Ultimately Untrue Thought." It's pretty rationalist. It's about social science and epistemology, good, clear thinking, with a focus on gender issues, in particular autogynephilia. And it was just reading his work during my initial foray into learning about autogynephilia helped me feel a lot less crazy because I was feeling a bit crazy, feeling gaslit because the science was saying one thing and then literally I was facing unanimous opposition from trans women online, all saying that it was wrong. So it kind of it had the sort of dissociation feeling from being lied to. Um, and anyways, his blog helped me a lot with that. He's put a lot of thought into this, and so I'm really glad to have him on the channel. Thank you for coming on my channel, Zach.
Thanks for having me. I've been meaning to do podcasts for a while, and I kept not actually getting around to writing up a pitch letter. So you wrote me a pitch letter, so it worked out a little bit late.
Hey, and yeah, if this is a great start, hopefully, and I hope to see you on more podcasts because I think you've put a great deal of thought into autogynephilia, and it's the politics surrounding it, and just you've put so much thought into it, and your blog goes into great depth, and it's a great resource for, I'd say, particularly sort of very rational thinking AGPs might really like it, and um, yeah, it just had a big impact on me, and I know I've heard from plenty of other self-aware AGPs that they really appreciate your blog. Like
Thanks.
as far as I could tell, you're held in high esteem by those who read
I
you.
mean, let the narcissism is probably not interesting to your listeners. We should get onto the content part, right?
All right, Zach, you're great. Okay, so yeah, I guess a good place to start might be um, sort of your history with autogynephilia, like how you first started noticing it in your life, and sort of what that looked like.
Yeah. So about age 13, eighth grade, I started it was a heteronormative time, so I already knew that boys were supposed to like girls, but there was that that moment in puberty where you start to actually like girls, and and around that time, I started it what basically around the same time that I started actually noticing girls. There was also just this sort of associated thought of I don't know how to describe it, but just wouldn't it wouldn't it be nice if I looked like that? And just sort of admiring women, but all in a sort of identificatory way. And within a few years, this sort of blossomed out into lots and lots of little things. I would write in, I started swirling the descenders in my handwriting because I thought it made my handwriting look more feminine. I when it was time to go to college and order bed sheets for the sheets at college, I deliberately got the pink with flowers design on principle. I was reading about feminism. So there was just this sort of this feeling of wanting to identify with women, and that was noticeably just and I guess someone listening to this account in 2024 would say well, the obvious explanation is you're trans. That's what's going on. You're obviously so trans, so eggy. And that's not what it looked like in 2004, because there was also this very, very obvious erotic aspect, which I don't think we need to go into that much detail on the podcast. But at the there was this beautiful, pure, sacred self-identity thing, but there was also very obviously this erotic thing, and the erotic thing was very obviously erotic. There was no reason to deny this. I didn't have a name for this thing. I didn't.
Did you connect the beautiful, pure, sacred self-identity thing, which I love how you call it that, 'cause I resonate with that description. Um, does it were you able to connect that to the erotic thing, or did it
I
feel
mean,
like they
like
were separate?
it seemed like they felt separate, but like it seemed like if I had bothered asking the question in that many words, like I would have obviously said there's a connection. Like it just um so like at the time I didn't really talk about the erotic thing. Cuz it was like very like you just this was not something I expected to be like podcasting about 20 years later. Um but yeah, so I don't know. So and I don't know where it came from. In middle school, my friends lent me this graphic novel series called Ranma Half, featuring a male protagonist who transforms into a woman on being exposed to cold water. Like I don't know if that had an influence, but like whatever, like that
Did you try
thing.
taking, like, a cold shower after reading that?
No, I mean no.
Okay.
But the because in the series, like he's like, oh no, this is a terrible curse. I want to rid myself of the curse, and I'm reading this being like, that actually sounds great.
Yeah,
Like
it's obviously
curse,
good, right?
yeah, right. And so obviously I did not tell anyone about this except like very haltingly a couple of close personal friends because like this is clearly a weird sex thing. You like there's no like and around like 2006 I was browsing Wikipedia and I found I found the word autogynephilia and I'm like, "Oh, there's a word for the thing. That's what I am. There's a word for the thing." I was very excited. I wrote about it in my notebook. I have a blog post like that like excerpts the page from my notebook about this.
Yeah, that's a
And
good post, I like that one.
um and and so at the time, and like even I wrote about this in my notebook at the time. I was surprised. So like of course, this is like 2006. I had like heard about transsexualism as a thing. Like everyone knows that exists, but it wasn't something that was like I had definitely not met any trans people in real life that I knew about. And the idea that so like I get exposed to this word, I'm like, oh, that's obviously the word for the thing, and I'm like surprised, like, wait, this is part of an explanation for transsexualism. I was actually surprised because like at the idea, so like as part of the whole beautiful, pure, sacred self identity thing, I was also like, I was like, at the time I called it anti-sexism. I was like very into psychological sex differences denialism, and so I was like, and so like the whole idea of like being trans because like you're actually a woman inside, like that seemed wrong to me. Like what would that mean?
Right, because
This
if
seems
there's very little differences between the sexes, then what would that even
yeah, like
mean?
it's just a sexist idea. Like it's you are your I knew I was a male because of my anatomy. That's just what the word means. And so like later as I was growing up in my later teens and 20s, like I read a lot more science and like I gradually sort of backed off from the what I'm now calling psychological sex differences denialism because I gradually realized that like yeah, this doesn't actually look true. Like I was very committed to it in principle, but like I look at the world around me and it just
It's obviously not true.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so and like but like as like I wrote in my diary in like 2004 I would never do drag because that represents a mockery and so like the idea of so it within the we within the social justice mindset of the time where sexism was a bigger problem than transphobia, like trans itself didn't seem like a politically correct idea to me back when I still believed in the political correctness of the time.
Yeah, and
And
I've noticed, like, quite a few trans people sort of They do something similar where they try to downplay sexual dimorphism, I think because they want but maybe for different reasons because they wanna think it's easier to cross over into the other gender if there are
Maybe.
less differences.
I spent 10 years from 2006 to 2016 reading everything I could about gender and transgender and evo psych and sex differences, and I didn't I didn't realize. So of course I had heard of Blanchard et al. It was in the Wikipedia article, and so in 2007, I bought this book when it was new, Julia Serrano's Whipping Girl, and it's just so funny in hindsight. It's just so darkly comic in hindsight, how many clues there were that I missed that about
The
that
connection between autogynephilia and transgenderism?
yeah, because I had assumed that AGP was a different thing. I had assumed oh well, trans people say they have this intergender identity thing, so I believe them. That must be right. And I'm like, but my thing is AGP. It's clearly it has to be a different thing because the idea that these are actually the same thing, or that they actually share, or that one is the root cause of the other, was not something it wasn't the mainstream view. And if it was because it wasn't the mainstream view, I had no particular reason to believe it. And it's just hilarious how many clues there were. Julia Serrano, okay. Media depictions of trans women, whether they take the form of fictional characters or actual people, usually fall under one of two main archetypes: the deceptive transsexual or the pathetic transsexual. While characters based on both models are presented as having a vested interest in achieving an ultra-feminine appearance, they differ in their abilities to pull it off. Because the deceivers successfully pass as women, they generally act as unexpected plot twists, or play the role of sexual predators who fool innocent straight guys into falling for other men. Anyway, if you look at this, when I looked at this back in 2016 after I had my Blanchardian enlightenment, I'm like, oh, this is the two types.
Exactly. Yeah.
and so it's just there's just until you anyway. So I had been exposed to this idea of the two type typology, but I read the man who would be queen, but I somehow just never put my weight down on it. I guess because I didn't know any trans people in real life. And so what changed was in 2016, I moved to Berkeley, California. I was already in the Bay Area, but I moved to what at the time I thought was the correct side of the Caldecott Tunnel. I've since changed my mind about that. But in Berkeley, it was closer to my day job in San Francisco, and I had more friends in the area, and so I moving to Berkeley, moving out of my mom's house. And then in Berkeley, you can't help but meet a higher density of trans people, and in particular, in my social circle, quite a lot of trans women. And you start to you can sort of notice the obvious similarities between me and a lot of these trans women. And this came as a huge shock, because I had been assuming for 10 years that my thing was a different thing.
Even though that Blanchard's theory was a theory of transsexualism, you still thought that AGP was a different
Well,
thing?
it wasn't. Yeah, but who? I mean, Blanchard is just some guy, right? And, I still believe this, by the way. How was I supposed to know that he was actually right? Lots of people say things.
Fair enough.
And so there was this period of several months of being wait a minute, I had assumed my thing was just a weird sex thing that I would just never just quietly live it, not shame exactly, but to a first approximation, quietly live in shame forever, because it wasn't I'd assumed that trans women are a different thing. And so I was a guy because I didn't have a choice in the matter. And so I might have these beautiful, pure, sacred identity feelings, such that I grew my beautiful ponytail, and there was a disastrous period in the late aughts where I was trying to use my initials as a nickname, because I thought I didn't like having an identifiably masculine name. Also,
right. An androgynous name would be better.
Yeah, this turned out to be a terrible idea, because like ZM doesn't actually even feel like a name. Like I wanted to like use my first two initials like a name. Like some people can pull that off. It just didn't work. And also like Zachary is like 10 times more common than Zoe and Zelda put together. Anyway, but like little things like that, there's just this obsession over years about like not femininity, because as a proud anti-sexist, I believe that femininity didn't really exist, but like femaleness and like wanting to identify with femaleness and just, but it was always a dream. I never actually believed it. And especially as I like grew out of my anti-sexist phase, like I especially didn't believe it. And so like suddenly moving to Berkeley, meeting all these people who like seemed a lot like me, but also like seemed to believe that they were women and seemed to believe that everyone else should believe that they were women. Like it didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't make sense. And it's funny because like I want to like, okay, I'm not a progressive, but like the underlying psychological generator that makes like progressive political sentiment sound like a good idea, I want to stay loyal to that generator. So when I say it doesn't make sense to me, like I don't mean that in the crudest, like meanest, like stigmatizing these people are bad and wrong and evil and unclean sense. Like I just mean it's literally not true. That's all.
Right. Yeah. It, what was it like? How did you start coming to realize that that you actually did share an ideology with them, so to speak?
I mean, so like as a result of this, like I started reading more. I read Kay Brown's blog and corresponded with her a bit. And I started having a lot of private conversations, like whenever I could, like, hey, could we talk in private about gender stuff? And people are pretty willing to talk in private, but still, but like people are pretty willing to talk in private, but there's still this like this disconnect where like again there's this fundamental stumbling block where like I can see there's this person who like our like my social circle agrees like this is a trans woman, and I'm looking at this and saying like that's a guy with long hair like me. And not to be and well it,
Right.
and I,
Yeah.
and like I guess it was different. It was different after taking Blanchard seriously, because before that, like I had met a trans woman at a meetup, and I had assumed she was a different thing, and I was like sort of like respectfully believing like, oh, I when it was still plausible that trans women, that most trans women were a completely different thing than me, like I actually believed the gender identity story and like didn't presume to question it. But like after the idea had been made salient to me that like, wait, my erotic thing and my beautiful pure self-identity thing, that is the thing people are calling being trans, like the illusion snapped, and I'm just like, I don't believe this. It's not, and like again, I'm a transhumanist. I am in favor of morphological freedom. If people want to like modify their bodies to like have a body that's more suited to them, that seems great to me. I think a society should accommodate that in some way. But like in order to figure out like what the correct way to accommodate is, you want to like be very, very clear about what the actual phenomenon is and like what the available interventions actually do. So like yeah, so after I mean, so I had this period of like going, freaking out, having a lot of private conversations, doing a lot of reading. At this point, I realized like, hey, I had fantasized, years before in 2009, I had like fantasized about taking hormones, but like, obviously never did anything about it because like it just wasn't done. So in like late 2016, I finally like, wait a minute, I actually am eligible. So I went to the gender clinic in Kaiser and like actually ended up trying out HRT for 5 months, and then sort of chickened out because I was like, what are the long-term health risks? What about fertility risks? I was just like, it was an experiment worth trying.
Do you think you're gonna try it again, or was that enough?
I think that was enough. So, um, I mean, I was
What was it?
curious.
The I recall like in your post about like I think it's called like putting cis the word cis and putting cis in decision or something like
Yeah,
that. Um, it it seemed like you were hoping that it would significantly change sort of how your mind works to be in a more feminine manner, and when
I
it didn't
mean,
do that.
well, because I mean, I wouldn't say hoping because again, remember, I still retain the generator of my teenage anti-sexism, even though I don't actually believe that anymore. But like, I was scientifically curious about like, is is it going to, is this going to have a huge effect? And like, I mean, subjectively, I don't think I noticed much. Like, I definitely noticed libido going down, but other than that, like, I can't say like I can't like definitively say it had no psychological effect other than the libido because maybe it did and I just didn't notice. But I don't think I felt very different. Other people will give you different self-reports on this, which is
Yeah. No,
sort of
I personally suspect that your experience is probably pretty accurate in terms of the actual, like, psychological changes it makes. Like, I expect it to make morphological changes, but I feel like a lot of the psychological changes people report are just them more inhabiting their feminine persona more deeply.
yeah. I mean, I kind of suspect that, but I haven't like studied it in detail. Like, I don't know. I don't want to like confident, rationality. I don't want to like confidently assert things that I don't actually know. But yeah, there was some breast growth, which was like, I mean, I'm
Nothing to
glad I
complain
did
about,
the.
right?
It was a worthwhile gender themed drug experiment, and at the time, I was like very adamant, like, no, I'm not transitioning. This is a gender themed drug experiment, and but it was just like this very like weird, just this very like just this. It's just bizarre to me that like so on the one hand, like you might think like if you disagree with everyone around you, like maybe you're the one that's wrong. But like
Yeah.
it just seems like there's it just seems like that like my theory does a better job of explaining everyone else's experience than their theory does about explaining me. Like you could try to come up with a story like, oh well, you actually are trans and you have a gender identity, but like you're just repressing it. And then the the erotic aspect it like is a effect of gender identity, not a cause. And like this worldview just seems sort of like horribly gerrymandered to me. And like
Yeah, I
so
agree.
like part of it comes with like anyway. So I mean, sorry, like I say horribly gerrymandered, but like in order to explain what that means, there's this whole associated like philosophy of language that like explains what I mean by that. And like maybe for people who didn't like follow my trajectory of going deep into the sex differences literature and like maybe and like deep into like the sort of philosophy I was reading, like maybe they don't have the same concepts that make this seem so intuitive to me, which again this goes both ways. Like I don't want to like arrogantly say, aha, I know more, therefore I'm epistemically superior to all of you. But on the other hand, like I try to like write clearly about what I think is going on. And if someone else thinks they have a better account, they're welcome to blog about it too.
Yeah. I've found that, um, w after I learned about autogynephilia and the associated theory, that it's it seemed to describe what I was seeing so good compared to the gender identity
Right,
theory.
especially when you just like look at what trans women write online when the general public isn't watching. Like if
Yeah.
you go to RMTF, like the subreddit, and like there are, and search for fetish in the sidebar, and there are like dozens upon dozens of posts where people say like, oh, I get an erection when I have gender euphoria, or like, or like my gender dysphoria goes away after masturbating, or like all these sorts of like very like these like, you know, if you just look at the literal text of what people are literally claiming about the world, like this is obviously autogynephilia. Like this, like obviously just like the straightforward explanation of what's going on if you just look at the world. And then the commenters are like, oh no, you know, it's, you know, they somehow, there's somehow this ideology that like, you know, you're actually a woman, specifically a woman who happens to be trans, and like this is just a symptom of that.
Yeah,
And
they switch up the cause and effect, basically, where, like, the gender identity is the ultimate cause in their perspective, whereas the way we see it is more that the autogynephilia is the ultimate cause.
yeah, or I mean, like I want to be like I want to be like I want to be like I don't want to be too like dogmatic about like, you know, there could be multiple causes. So in the sense that like introspectively, like it seems like a pretty good guess that like my AGP was like a necessary cause of the what I've been calling the beautiful pure sacred self identity thing. But like it might, you know, you can imagine it not being a sufficient cause. Like the fact that like I'm not a macho guy, I'm kind of a sensitive introspective nerd, and like there could be multiple causes leading to someone to have like gender identity feelings, but it still seems pretty obvious that autogynephilia is a major cause.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm open to the possibility that there's other causes, but I just haven't seen any convincing cases made for any additional causes besides, you know, the homosexual type, of course.
Yeah. Well, but like you can imagine, so like you can imagine like so like there don't necessarily have to be discrete types, right? I mean, like okay, yes, it clearly looks like the late onset type and the early onset type. Like you just look at the world, like these seem like very different things, but like within like part of what makes this such a puzzle is that like the late onset type itself, like there's lots of variety, and
Yeah.
you could say that, you know, you could insist that like autogynephilia is the root cause and it like manifests in various ways, or you could posit that like autogynephilia is a major cause and there are like other inputs that could go into it. Like I don't actually know, and like anyway, let's go switching back to my story. In 2016, so like I had a lot of these conversations. I did a lot of reading, and at the time I was feeling like very betrayed, very upset that like, you know, my society, my subculture is like very like very much believes in gender identity in a way that like I just don't think makes sense. I don't think it's true. And so and you know, AGP like very clearly seems like a very prominent causal factor that like no one seems to be treating as a prominent causal factor. Like you can sort of force people, like if you corner someone in the right context, like you can get them to admit that the phenomenon exists. But like the idea that this is a major cause is and that the causes actually matter does not seem to be on people's radar. So, you know, most of this freaking out was in private to start, and then like gradually getting louder and louder, and deciding to start a blog. And I took my very smart and very cowardly friend's advice to start using a pseudonym at first. So I was M. Taylor Satomi Westlake, the first part of that pen name being from Ron Mahaf. And so I started a blog and I started writing about this stuff. And as I was writing, like at first I thought I was arguing for the two type typology, that like there's HSTS, the early onset type, there's AGP, the late onset type, and like these are different things. Like Blanchard, Bailey, and Lawrence are right about everything. I was like, and like the reason I was so insistent that they were right about everything was because like no one else had any credible alternative. And you know, as I started arguing, as I was like having these arguments with people in my intellectual community, the really disturbing thing is that like it started seeming to be the case that like the causes and the etiology didn't actually seem to be a crux for people. So like I started out arguing that like, okay, like AGP, late onset gender dysphoria is not an intersex condition. You can choose to do what, like, we can, we can be very libertarian and transhumanist about it, but let's be clear about the facts. And it seemed like I kept getting hit with this argument. I kept seeing this argument that was like not even engaging with the empirical question of like, is AGP the root cause in like all these trans women that we know, but just saying like, okay, we can, words like categories are human invention that we impose upon the world. How about we define the word women such that it includes people who want to be identified as women? And since this way of drawing the category boundary will make people happier, like that's the utilitarianly correct decision. I think this argument is bonkers. Like this is like really, really crazy.
Right. It kind of undermines the sort of the rationalist subculture is about using like good reasoning and epistemology to arrive at true things,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't really want to talk about the rationalists in this
Okay.
podcast that much because like anyway, basically I'm part of a cult. Okay, it's not really a cult. There's this subculture that, internet-based subculture that like ostensibly cares a lot about reasoning and science and that kind of stuff. That's all your listeners need to know. And that's the context in which I was having these debates with everyone. And okay, I guess it is a little bit relevant that like one of the subculture's founding texts specifically had this sequence about like how language works and how you want to like draw your categories that like carve reality at the joints, such that like you group like when, what does it mean when we call someone a woman or call this a book or call a pencil? Like, what does it mean for something to belong to a category? And the proposed answer here is that like you group similar things into the same category in order to make similar predictions about them. So like you can observe because like reality is complicated. You can't like know everything about the world, but you can use features that you observe to assign category membership, and then once you've done that, use category membership to make predictions about the features that you haven't observed yet. So if I see a cat, I can probably predict, and like I haven't seen it move yet. I haven't heard it like make any noises yet, but I can probably predict that it's going to move in a cat-like way and make the meowing sound that cats make, because like this is a very stable, predictable feature of the world that I can use to make predictions, even if I haven't seen this particular animal before. And so that's how categories work.
Right.
And so, in 2009, like this was not controversial that this is how categories work among the sort of weird nerds who like actually talk about this area of philosophy occasionally. And then suddenly in 2016, the weird nerds who talk about this area of philosophy occasionally have this like brand new philosophy of language that says, well, like when we do that thing with cat, where like assuming the cat is going to meow and assuming it's like, we do that for our convenience. Therefore, like it's not like an inherent feature of the world. And therefore, we can also like define gender categories the way we want. And like, this is really crazy. And but like explaining why it's crazy is actually kind of subtle. Like I spent quite a lot of time like thinking about this in a lot of detail, writing many thousands of words, like carefully explaining the problems, doing a little bit of math. And so it was funny because like, at first I thought I was arguing for the two-type typology, and then it turns out like these situation on the ground of like what our culture is interested in is like it's actually so much worse than I thought at first, because I thought people would be interested in the empirics of like what is going on, and it turns out that's not even the main issue. I didn't even need to get there because I was still stuck on this much more basic issue of like, can you like redefine concepts in order to make your map of the territory look good to you?
Right. Like, can you redefine words to make people feel better?
Yeah, and like And like just the fact that I had to put so much effort into this very, very obvious thing, and like people still pretended. I mean, I think the smart people got it, but like it didn't percolate out to like cultural level common knowledge.
Right, and they might not say it openly, even the people that did get it.
Yeah. And so like I'm, at this point, like, and so like because I'm less dogmatic, because I'm like less dogmatic about this two-type typology these days, like at this point, like I'm not even fighting. So like I'm not like I don't even necessarily care that much about like we need to popularize the two-type taxonomy specifically. I do want to popularize like AGP is a real thing that is clearly a causal factor in a lot of these gender problems, and also just like biological sex actually exists and is sometimes relevant even when it makes people sad. That is my minimum ask. And like
Yeah, it's a
you
low
shouldn't.
bar.
It's a very low bar, but like people who want to remain in good standing with like progressive society are not going to say that sentence on Twitter. Like everyone believes this, but no one is going to say it that clearly.
Yeah, it's definitely it's frustrating. I've had similar frustration when talking with people about gender stuff years ago when I was first learning about autogynephilia. So the people that were disagreeing with me couldn't tell me what a woman was, with a non-circular definition, and it's like I just fundamentally can't respect interlocutors when they can't even define such a supposedly central term, and especially if they have a gender studies degree and can't tell me what a woman is. Like, what did you even learn?
Yeah, well, I mean, the gender studies we wish we had is not the gender studies we actually have.
Yeah.
Like I remember, like, the back in 2007, like I was really excited to. This was like still back in my anti-sexism phase. Like I was really excited to take the Introduction to Feminisms class at UC Santa Cruz because I still believe like I was still like very, very very early in my disillusionment with like the cultural left. And it's because I was excited, like, I'm going to Introduction to Feminism. This is a great class. I'm going to like do well as a male in this class and be honorable. And it just felt like the whole class was like spoken in a language that I couldn't speak. Because you have all these assertions that like this and such is oppression. And like, yes, obviously I agree. I'm a good person. But like, how does the oppression work? And it just seems like there are large swaths of social science that like are not really into like figuring out how the world works in a disinterested way, and like that sounds mean and uncharitable, like
No, it's fair. That's accurate.
but when you talk to the people themselves, like they don't really seem to disagree either.
Yeah,
Like
it's frustrating.
I was in a contemporary sexuality class at SF State. I have a very tragic education schooling backstory that we don't need to get into because that's not what this podcast is about. But like, I'm like complaining in class, like, okay, but activism and scholarship are different things, and the professor's like, no, I don't think they are. So
Yeah, I've been bothered to see sort of the corruption of the academy with how political it's gotten. There's whole fields like sociology and anthropology, for instance, that are so heavily weighted towards the sort of activist researchers that there's not actually research being done anymore into
yeah,
like true
and like
stuff.
again, I don't. I am wary of like the possible failure. So like the woke social justice people have their own ideological bubble. Like I'm wary of like I don't want to fall into the failure mode of like forming an anti-woke bubble where we form our own like parallel ideological bubble that like we're not aware of. So like I don't want to say that I don't want to say that there's like nothing. I recommend reading widely. Like, I don't want to say that there's nothing there, but like there's still something missing. And
Yeah.
but like you can imagine, so like at this point, like I'm not. It turns out that I'm not. I'm not that. Like you can imagine a better world where like there was the state of scientific literacy like was greater, and we did have more real science on this topic, because like there's just so much that we just don't know, and there's not a whole lot of people interested in like figuring stuff out. And like even me, like I'm mostly not working on this topic these days because I have other things to do with my life.
Right, you've kind of already thought through a lot of it and might just feel like, "I've already done that, been there, done that," sort of
Well, I
thing.
mean, I've done the stuff that I needed to do. Like, I've done the stuff that I needed to do to figure out my own life. Like, because in 2016, this was all like very confusing. Like, what's going on? And now, like, I think I have like enough of a basic picture of like enough of a basic picture of like how the world works and how it differs from like the socially acceptable narrative world, that like I'm not in this fundamental epistemic crisis anymore. And like now
Right.
that the crisis is solved, I can like go do math and programming and stuff. But like while the crisis was going on, like resolving it seemed pretty urgent. But like it's sad because like even because the ideas you have, like what one of the complications, like one of the things that makes studying psychology so hard is that like the ideas you have like influence what your mind is like. Your mind is partially made of ideas. So I sort of wonder if like you kind of expect that like on a biological level, like my experience of AGP and like trans women's experience of AGT like is probably pretty similar. I mean, modulo like hormone replacement therapy is going to change some stuff, but like
Right, but
the
you
way,
interpret it differently.
yeah, the way I interpret my experience is like, so like for me, because I learned about AGP first and like lost my belief in psychological sex differences denialism. Like when I'm thinking about like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a female body? Like it's very clear to me, like even like while writing erotica for myself or getting GPT-4 to write erotica for me, I'm very clear that like this is a story about a male-brained person wanting to have a female body. Like I'm sort of mostly on the anatomic autogynephilia rather than the interpersonal dimension. And like rather than like, oh, like magically just being a woman, because like there's a question of the implementation details. Like given that there are sex differences in psychology and the brain, like do I actually want to have a female brain? Like if you could actually do that, would that be desirable? And like when I like introspect on my own desires, I think my answer is largely no, because I mean, other than like scientific curiosity, like being a transhumanist and wanting to experience everything, but like just I sort of have, if I take it seriously, I sort of have to imagine that if I could magically have a more female-like brain, it seems like that would like by necessity like take out the part of the necessarily male part of my sexuality that finds this very scenario like exciting, right? If you were actually
Right,
a
yeah.
woman, you would not be like so like erotically obsessed with this idea of being a woman. Or at least that's always seemed obvious to me. A lot of people seem to dispute this. I don't think we have time to like get into the AGP and cis women debate on this podcast, but like, I don't find it. I've never found that very plausible.
Yeah. I I don't find it too plausible either. Like, maybe it happens to a subset of lesbians, but I wouldn't
Yeah,
expect
I
it to
could.
be that
Yeah,
common.
I read a couple self reports from lesbians that like, okay, maybe that, but like, that's usually not what people are talking about when they say cis women are AGP2, which I think is
Right.
mostly common.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, what
When
I'm
how did people when you started writing your blog and people started reading it, what sort of reactions did you get from it?
I mean mostly like again like my social circle is like they're pretty good at my social circle is pretty good at free speech norms. So like I think it was mostly just a lot of polite disagreement, but like it's the funny thing. They're good enough at free speech norms such that like I'm allowed like I'm not getting like hounded out of the city or like actively shunned. But like they're not good at like using the power of free speech to get the right answer. But they're not going to ostracize you either.
Yeah. Well, that's
So
not so bad. I mean,
yeah.
it's not still not the best, but it could have been a lot worse, at least
Yeah.
emotionally.
I mean, okay, I mean I did actually have that nervous breakdown and did get hospitalized, but like it could have been worse. Like there was a moment like there was is did my video go out for you?
No.
Oh,
Maybe the connection just slowed for a bit.
okay. The I mean there was a dramatic episode that I mentioned in part one of my memoir where like I was arguing about this stuff on Facebook and like staying up too late and like eventually the stress and the sleep deprivation. I went a little bit crazy for a while there. So like on the one hand, like it the it was actually pretty bad for me. But like I also I don't want to I guess I want to accept my share of the blame for that and say that like my friends are pretty good at free speech norms, even though they're not very good at like actually being sane. And I'm sorry if that sounds arrogant, but I've also like in non-podcast form, I've like written in thousands of words and lots of detail, like why I think that. And if someone disagrees, like please let me know in the comments.
Right. Because yeah, you definitely if someone disagrees with you, you'll definitely be willing to listen to them and update your beliefs if you see that they have a good point.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the philosophy of language thing was actually like, on the one hand, like I'm resentful that I had to go into that much detail and rigor to about this like very obvious, drop dead obvious thing, but like it actually was a pretty good exercise in like being better at philosophy of like actually nailing down all these because it gets pretty subtle. I wrote this. I ended up writing a 11,000 word post. Unnatural categories are optimized for deception, in which I'm arguing that like the reason, the reason that you would might the only reason that you would want to like draw category boundaries for non-predictive reasons is because you want like you want to fool someone or you want to fool some part of yourself into making a prediction that will like make the map look good at the expense of reflecting the territory. And I don't know if that made sense to your listeners, but like you can read the post. We'll link it in the description.
Yeah. It's how I remember I think I first started reading your blog around the time you had that sort of detour into the philosophy of language stuff. And I got what you were doing because I'd already read the stuff on autogynephilia.
Yeah.
Did the people in your subculture recognize what you were doing?
I mean, the people I was having gender discussions with did. Like, I guess the people like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can imagine it looking weird to some people. Like, why are you so bent up about the philosophy of language? But like, I think people knew because
Right.
like
It seemed like
I was trying to do because I was trying to do this thing where I was trying to keep the philosophy stuff separate. So, because I hadn't even dropped the M. Taylor Satomi Westlake pseudonym yet. So like for quite enough for a couple years, my writing was actually in this awkward state where like I have my gender and politics blog, and I'm also doing real life blogging about the philosophy of language. and like these things are obviously like one is obviously the result of the other, and like people knew. So I eventually ended up dropping the pseudonym because it was just eventually too awkward that like I wasn't, I took my cowardly friend's advice to like start with a pseudonym, but I just temperamentally I'm just not well suited to keeping secrets, which is actually probably causally related to why I'm doing autogynephilia blogging in the first place. That like I want
Yeah.
I want a world that makes sense, and I want a world that makes sense in public, and I don't want to hide. So eventually, so like the pseudonym, I started with a pseudonym, but like it was never I never took anonymity very seriously. I'm not worried. I was like the level of privacy I was going for was like the first name of my Zack M. Davis Google search results should like hopefully not be my politically sensitive blogging just for the sake of future job searches. But eventually I'm not even worried about that anymore. I'm going on your podcast with my real name and face.
Yeah, I know. I remember you dropped your you decided to drop you said you were going to drop the pseudonym like around the time that I was finishing the manuscript for my book.
Oh yeah.
And I was glad to see that you finally felt comfortable coming out. And I that sort of point you made about basically a desire for like prioritizing honesty sort of is causally related to talking about autogynephilia.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely feel that that applies to myself as well. That like I didn't feel that it was right that I would have to lie because other people with my same sexuality didn't like what the science said about them.
Yeah. And like again, like I've said this a couple times, but like, if someone has doubts about the science, like that's fine. Like, it is possible to have like skeptical good faith doubts about like the detail, because the whole like autogynephilia theory, it's not just like one atomic claim that like stands or falls on its own. Like there's this whole bundle of claims about like, oh, well, what about bisexual trans women? And there's a proposed explanation. Well, that's meta attraction. And like, you could reasonably have doubts about, some people might say like, well, maybe some AGPs really are bisexual. And, maybe, and so like, I'm not wedded to like every specific detail of like, all but all supposedly bisexual trans women are really just only AGP, and like I mean, you've actually gone into. I mean, you're actually in a better position to have an informed opinion to me than me, because like for your book, you went deep into the literature.
Yeah, I was reading before I even started writing the book. I was obsessively reading about this stuff for like about a year, and then it
Yeah,
got to a point where I knew too much to not share it, and then I
yeah.
started writing the
I mean,
book.
like I've read a lot of the stuff too, obviously,
Yeah.
but like I've just like again like all I I'm just heartbroken about that. I couldn't even get to the like biological sex actually matters thing. Like I don't even care. I don't like. I'm not actually that curious. Like these days, I'm just not even that curious about the details, because like I figured out. I know enough to solve my own issues, and I'm not like I don't know. I was thinking like a good title for this podcast episode would be AGP and Epistemic Despair.
Okay.
Because I'm just
Gotcha.
like, at this point, I'm just in despair of like, having a world that makes sense, and like figuring out what, and like I don't know.
It seems like that people's desire to have beliefs that feel good is trumping the desire for truth.
Yeah.
It sort of seems like the fundamental thing that is
Or so
happening as far as I can
or
tell.
right. But so like sorry, um like you and I have both like, oh, by the way, you and I have both had interactions with our friend Tailal, who, I mean, maybe
Yeah.
he's not your friend. So like, he started he started the Blanchardism subreddit. And then later, like he got to, he got disillusioned. And by the way, I think you should have him on the show. Like
Yeah, maybe.
he's cutting at cross purposes for your political campaign, but I still think it would be a great episode. Anyway, but like so like he and like he did a lot of surveys and like trying to figure out like what's actually going on with trans, and like he ended up getting disillusioned with the Blanchardism side, because he thought the science wasn't rigorous enough, and he had doubts about the details of ELT and meta attraction and so on and so forth. And like I think Tail does great work, and like it's sort of just like a tragic commentary on like the state of the world, that like I think there was a dynamic that like he was frustrated that like we our intellectual circle, the Blanchardians, are not being rigorous enough and not being scientifically curious enough. And like I kind of want to plead guilty to that in some sense, because the reason I did so much writing was not because I was like desperately curious to figure out all the sexological details about how does meta attraction work or whatever. It was because like I had this personal need that like when I look at the world around me, it sure seems like trans women are men and trans men are women, or male and female respectively, if you prefer that. And like it seems like this matters. It seems like this has implications.
Right, it does matter.
I'm curious about at least some of the detail,
Yeah,
And
where are
so
you on, autoandrophilia? Do you think it's a thing?
I mean it looks like it's a thing. You had Laura on the show, right?
Right, yeah, I know. I mean, obviously there's I find there to be compelling
Yeah.
self-reports, like case studies, but I guess I was curious,
I mean,
about
I don't want to like confidently have an opinion about things I haven't studied in detail.
Okay. Yeah, fair
So
enough.
like yeah, I don't know. There was just a sense of like I learned enough to break with the progressive zeitgeist, and like I'm mostly focused on other things now.
Yeah, I also have learned enough about gender stuff and other related things to where the worldviews of what I've learned is too dissimilar from the progressive zeitgeist for me to really believe in it anymore.
But and yet it moves. Like we're still in this situation where like so like when like trying to figure out my own self, like I wrote about my experiences. I and like I read about other people's experiences. I read the scientific literature. Like I sort of like I feel like I have myself basically figured out, and I don't want to be super confident about I don't want to be super confident and dogmatic about having all of sexology and all of psychology figured out. But like when I look at the younger generation, I see people who are in their early 20s are people like me who are in their early 20s. It's not 2006 anymore. These people are transitioning, and like I talk to them and be like, hey, have you considered this autogynephilia thing? And like a lot of them can be like acknowledge similar experiences, but like the culture is, but like it's still interpreted through this lens of, yeah, but I'm trans. Like that's what, like
Right.
people have this gender identity first ontology, and that is like so baked in to respectable progressive culture that like it's almost like the facts don't matter. Arguing doesn't even work because like there's this entrenched cultural institution of like being a trans woman, and like the map has influenced the territory in like forming this new gender role. And like, because again, like you can talk to people in private, people can be pretty reasonable. Like you can have people acknowledge in private, like, yeah, I agree that like gynophilic trans women don't seem to be sampled from the cis female distribution. I agree that it sort of makes sense to think of trans women as sort of a de facto third gender role. But like, it's weird to have this culture where like a lot of people know this, a lot of people a lot of people have this view, but it is not the common knowledge consensus view. Like a lot of people have this view privately and they coexist and share the same social circle with a lot of other people who will say things like, yeah, well, back when I thought I was a straight guy. And then, I'm silently, because I've sort of learned,
Learn to be silent.
Well, no. Well, because like, I'm not, I sort of like assign myself a diplomacy budget where like people in my social circles like know of my opinion. And so I don't have to bring it up all the time. Like you don't have to keep fighting the same fight every time. Like as an atheist in a Christian society, you're not going to start a fight every one time someone praises God. It's just not workable. But I'll sit there thinking like, okay, but you are a straight male. Like just literally, you are literally in fact biologically male, and you are literally in fact gynophilic. That's what those words used to mean. Straight guy.
Yeah.
And like that's not what those words mean now, but like this is kind of a weird and unstable situation where you have this social you have this like de facto third gender that everyone is like bought into respect, and me too. Like I use people's correct pronouns even when they don't pass, but just like I wish I don't know without even committing in detail to what a better world would look like, the current state of affairs does not seem that great to me. And I'm sort of despairing. I wrote my blog. I'm doing this. I speak up where I can, but like I'm just a very small part of the world spirit, and it seems like the world spirit has other ideas. And I don't think the thing that we have is very sustainable. Like but like there's that old saying, like the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. Like it seems like, gender identity culture, it seems like it can endure it seems likely that it can endure for like a surprisingly long time before like rather than strictly collapsing under the cold light of reason, you can imagine it collapsing because like something else game changing happens instead, like superhuman artificial intelligence or fertility collapse or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think it will eventually collapse just because my perspective on it is that since it's not an accurate description of reality, it's being held in force by sort of authoritarian measures. Like people are taught a very specific way of thinking, and there are consequences for saying otherwise. But I think as trans people, their population continues to grow, more and more people are going to have everyday experience with transsexuals, and sort of I think more people will encounter a dissonance between what they're perceiving and what they're being told to think.
Yeah, but there might be a sort of path dependence where like the equilibrium that we end up with is could be pretty different from like what would happen if like the kinds of discussions that you and I are trying to have like had happened like earlier in political time and been louder and more dominant in the public sphere. Because like we could end up in a lot of places you are ending up with this like de facto third gender role thing where people still notice who's AFAB and who is AMAB, and like people are still noticing these things, but like you also still have this entrenched institution of being a trans woman or being a trans man, whereas like you can imagine a different world where like, biological sex was always primary, and some AGPs become femboys or something like that. And in some ways, I think that could like, I don't want like, with all due respect to my trans women friends, I think that would be a healthier world in some ways.
Y- yeah, I think it would be more ontologically sound.
Yeah.
But I think what we have now, the gender identity, sort of the ideology associated with it, I think it was kind of inevitable given just the individual. It seems to me like an egregore that arises out of the autogynephilic wish to be a woman to the greatest extent possible. And then once
Yeah.
enough people have that wish, it created this cultural entity.
Yeah. Which is just so heartbreaking because like because like the way like people who know me in Berkeley, like no one seems to so like if someone was like trying to like protect gender identity culture, there's one particular tack you could imagine taking where you say like, oh, fine, you Zach, you're just a weird fetishist. That's totally a different thing from actually being a trans woman, which is again basically what I thought for 10 years. And it's kind of funny that like among people who know trans people, like in Berkeley, no one actually seems to believe that. Like when I say like I think I'm in the same taxon as trans women, like no one particularly seems to doubt this.
Right. Yeah. Because they'll notice the similarities.
Like you can notice, yeah. And I mean, it's also funny because again, like it it breaks my anti-sexist heart, but like sex difference in like interests and personality. Like if you go to like there's a very particular kind of geek that's like interested in like things instead of people. So like there are particular subcultures where like it's very it's surprisingly easy to get into a situation where in a particular context where there are more trans women than cis women, and that sort of like breaks a lot of illusions.
Right. Like I recall you writing about that happening at like a Rust convention, if I'm
Yeah.
correct.
Well, maybe. Yeah.
Which is basically like in sort of the programming spheres um, that are tilted towards males so much. Basically,
Yeah.
trans women are a significant proportion of the women.
Yeah. I mean, so there's this very common thing when I see online like uh like an interesting programming blog post by someone with a female name. I'm like, oh, are they trans? And like, not always, but like
But usually,
a significant fraction of the time,
yeah,
very significant fraction of the time. And I think I examined like the Haskell community survey data, and like the trans women to cis women ratio was about 1 to 1. So
right. Which is it sort of backs up that point you were saying about trans women being sampled from a different distribution than
yeah,
the cis women.
yeah, and again, like if you have this philosophical insight about like what it means for something to belong to a category, being modeled, being more accurately modeled as being sampled from a different distribution is sort of like what it means to belong to a category. So when I say that I'm male, like it's not because like I'm like identifying with masculinity or maleness or like my some vision of like fulfilling male gender roles. It's just that like unfortunately or not, or I am in fact biologically male, and like you probably can make some inferences about my behavior and psychology from this. Like I've accepted this now. I
Yeah,
didn't I didn't want to believe this in 2004, but like it is what it is.
yeah. Was it hard to accept that? And like once you did, was there a difference in how you felt?
I mean, it was pretty like these things are pretty gradual.
Yeah,
Um, oh yeah, like and so like the other like in terms of like despair turning the culture around. Like, you had, so like, I'm grateful to you for writing the popular level book, so I don't have to. And really, I couldn't have, because like, I'm a sense maker and not a popularizer. I'm trying to get like, when my curiosity is aroused, like I want to like be as rigorous and detailed as possible, which is not the same thing as like writing a popular level text that you can like, hawk at conferences and stuff. But like I heard you had a pretty interesting experience at like GenSpec last October.
Yeah. Yeah, I wore what is for me typical garb. Obviously not typical garb for women, sample from different distribution, as we've talked about. And they actually, at the conference itself, it was perfectly fine. I exhibited no conflict, got along with people, not an issue at all. But then a few days later on Twitter, Kelly J. Keane struggled GenSpect, and it started this conflict
Yeah.
between the two different schools of feminists, between the liberal feminists and the sort of the rad femmes,
Yeah.
and with me as the ostensible target, right? Like I'm like the focal point of the discussion, but it's not actually a conflict with me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, when you were seeing that, what are some of your thoughts on
Well,
on
just
it?
like, I don't know, just like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I do actually have a little bit of. I think I have more sympathy for the rad femmes than you, because like they're
Yeah,
not like, because a lot of like Kelly J. Keane, Karen Davis types. They're not like they're very clear that they're not trying to do sense making. They want a society in which women have their traditional protected spaces, and they are fighting for that. And like insofar as people like you and me are like more amenable to a compromise solution where like trans women can like get their body mods, but we also like don't destroy the public concept of sex. Like they're not happy with that compromise, and like I can see why they're not like. I just wish like I can see that there are reasons why it isn't, but like I wish the whole conversation could take place at a higher meta level where like first we establish like a shared map of the territory of what's actually going on, and then separately, in addition to that, like we have the policy debate about what to do about it. But like given that that's like so hard for humans to pull off, like I have a little bit of sympathy for the people who are like worried that like ostensible attempt, like they want to go back to the world where sex is a top level category that has these top level protections. And like I also want like,
I think we're both kind of sympathetic to that to some extent,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I actually used to, I think around like 2016 or so, I got exposed to radical feminism, and it seemed really plausible to me for a bit. It seems like a lot of HPs find it plausible because we're kind of primed to put women up on a pedestal, and
Mm-hmm.
radical feminism is kind of female supremacist in sort of its vibe.
Uh, you
And
you froze. Are we still
I froze.
recording? My audio. I'm not hearing you.
Okay, yeah, I think it's still going.
Sorry, you froze up for me for a second.
Yeah, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that I think that like I originally got exposed to radical feminism and it seemed plausible, but after I learned more about, psychological sex differences, for example, um I came to realizing that it was not a simple matter of, while sort of the male oppression of females is kind of an ancient thing. It even occurs in other primates. It's not just in humans. It's not as simple as that sort of Marxist derived
Yeah,
version of
but
it
I mean,
that
you
the
could. There's also an
yeah.
angle you can. There's also like an naturalistic fallacy angle you can take on it and say like, yeah, this happens in other primates, but it's still terrible, and like you could
Well,
still like,
yeah, no, I don't like it.
yeah,
I do have some egalitarian sentiments. I mean, I live on the West Coast,
yeah,
in Portland, like, um, so, but however, like, I think we do have to recognize that males and females are, on average, different psychologically, and this is apparent to us in everyday life.
yeah,
Um, and I'm not sure what the quite what the right policy is. Like, I agree with you that, at least with regards to transsexualism, that adults, the morphological freedom thing, that adults should be able to have access to alter their body. Um, and it may just never be reconcilable between the radical feminists and people that want that freedom.
yeah. So I don't know. I think we've covered most of the stuff I wanted to cover.
Yeah. Um, I noticed you also wanted to talk about, um, that the sort of thing I'm doing, like, the cause of raising, um, say, like, autogynephilic identity as sort of a social category, um, that you're pessimistic about it to some extent, and I'd be curious to hear about.
Well, just empirically, just empirically, like the because I know like people in their early 20s who have transitioned and even people who are you know socially adjacent to me and like my writing in some cases. If they're not buying it, then the rest of like the chances for like the rest of society just seem like incredibly bleak. Like if I if I can't win definitively like in my own native subculture with it where like I have so much home field advantage, then like the prospects of like winning a broader cultural battle just seem hopeless.
Yeah, I do feel that I'm in somewhat of an underdog situation, that there is a lot of.
And again, okay. I mean, it also like sorry, I also want to highlight that like it
Yeah,
may seem it may seem like uncouth to talk about winning in like because like ideally like you want to like figure out what's actually true and not just like fight a zero sum war between like different ideas where like the ideas you ended up with you're just like blindly loyal to them without any particular reason, but like it looks like they're actually like you kind of like science and politics do actually interact, unfortunately. And so there is actually there so like separately from the fact that I think I'm right, there's also like the project of like sharing those ideas with other people does have some similarities with war and competition, even though that feels like it seems like it shouldn't be the case. Anyway, go
right.
on.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is a political element to it for sure, which is, like, why I might describe it as, like, trying to win something. But I even though there does seem to be a lot of headwinds to people accepting, um, autogynephilia theory, I still am optimistic about the ability to spread the ideas and grow the proportion of the autogynephilic and autoandrophilic population who understand these ideas.
Yeah,
And
on the
I
margins.
think, yeah, on the margins, and particularly among the autists, um, I think as far as I could tell, it these sort of ideas, the autistic autosexuals seem the most able to separate sort of what is true from what might feel good,
Yeah.
and they are the most promising subgroup. And I think when you get a large enough group of autists together working on something, great things can happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that even though in everyday life there may not the incentives might not be there for people yet for people to be out as autogynephilic or autoandrophilic, um, at least to the degree that say like homosexuals are able to be out. Um, I do think that so much of life happens these days in the disembodied domain of the internet, and even people who haven't transitioned, they might want to be able to participate in gender discourse and talk about their own experiences and sexual identity, just as people with more well-established identities do.
Mhm.
And yeah, and my hope is that over time, through building a within community discourse, um, we'll collectively sort of improve each other's knowledge, and when we have false ideas, sort of disprove them. And my hope is that over time, we'll iteratively arrive at but more of our kind understanding the sort of type of sexual orientation they have,
Yeah.
and also more of them accepting it in a chill way where it's not this huge um, damage to their self-image, where it's really just like not a big deal because they know other people like that they respect, and it's fine.
Yeah. To the future.
Yeah,
Whatever future we can get.
yeah. I mean, I understand feeling a little bit hopeless, but I think I'm trying to take a really long view on this. That if autogynephilia is true, then eventually that sort of meme will win out to some extent, and it might take a very long time. I mean, people are still struggling with evolution by natural selection.
Yeah.
It used to be Christians that were bothered by it, and now it's the egalitarian left that has issues with its implications. Um, but I think eventually ideas that are true will they have a certain staying power to them.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
we can hope.
Yeah, I can hear in your voice. Like I can understand feeling dispirited after what you went through with trying to talk about autogynephilia and then having
Well,
sort of
again,
that
but
reality. Yeah.
I could understand the nuanced specific doubts of like every little like because like Blanchard and Bailey, like there's like lots of detailed claims here about like so I could also like if someone has read the erotic target identity inversion paper and has like specific doubts about like you know like again like I don't know like I don't I don't want to be defending a fixed dogma, but like I do want a world where facts matter. And it seemed like the crux I ran into with people was not like not about science. It just seemed like people don't think that non-social facts matter.
Yeah, I understand it's frustrating. um it yeah, I do want to say that it did really help me when I was struggling with sort of this when upon learning that I was autogynephilic and then having people doubt me and I was struggling with it, it did help me a lot to see that I wasn't the only one that had gone through this sort of struggle before
Yeah.
of having the reality doubted even after reading the papers and everything. Um, and so your
I
blog
mean, I
was
don't I
yeah.
have reservations about that phrasing of like, oh, like I don't want to copy their phrasing of like, oh no, you're doubting my reality, therefore you're oppressing me. Like
You know what I mean,
doubting,
though? Like,
I know
just
what
in,
you
like,
mean.
an
I know what you
emotional
mean.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I mean, like, in the just the realistic experience of, like, you've put in due diligence to know what is true, or at least to read a bunch of papers and do your best to, like, try to find out what's true, and then just have everyone still doubt it. It's kind of crazy making.
yeah,
And it, like, it seeing that that had happened, to someone else made me feel less crazy, um, and it also made me realize how serious the problem was, that it was happening in a subculture that is supposedly super, super rational, and
yeah.
so
They're totally lying about that.
yeah, I know it. Well, because 'cause they're human ultimately, right?
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, so it was part of the impetus for me to write my book. I didn't want that to continue happening to people, and I didn't think it was fair what happened to me or you, and also, there wasn't yet a popular level book.
yeah.
The closest thing was Anne Lawrence's book, but the title seemed, like, designed to hurt AGPs in the fields,
I love
and
the title.
no, I
I
loved it
thought it
at
was
first.
great.
No, I don't get me wrong, I loved it at first, the transgressiveness of it. I thought it was, like, I loved the edginess of it. I thought it
But like,
was
it's not even. I don't even think it was about edginess. I think it's just like descriptively accurate.
yeah, but, like, because it's accurate, it hurts emotionally, right?
I guess
A little
so.
bit.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
that was again. That was like this shocking thing. Like talking to people in private in 2016. Like I bought extra copies of Men Trapped in Men's Bodies to like give to
same.
people, and
Yeah.
like I snuck it. So I snuck it into like more than one queer center library. Like you go to the community's queer center and they have a bookshelf. I just like sneak the book
Yeah.
in there. Um, the but I
I
gave
made my
this.
local library system buy it, and then they had it for a couple years, but p someone must have complained and they removed it now.
Oh, so I gave someone this book and like get complaints of I got complaints along the lines of like, well, it seems like Lawrence is someone complained that like Lawrence used the word transgendered. I don't even remember, but like just like grammatical complaints, like saying men instead of AMAB or whatever. And I'm just
Right.
like, okay, but like, can has it occurred to you for just a moment that someone who is not part of your ideological subculture and use like exactly the same terminology as you might have things to say about reality?
I think people that are trapped in that ideological subculture have a poor time modeling other subcultures because it's the progressive zeitgeist is so all-encompassing.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it was that's interesting that you also had gotten extra copies because like, I bought an extra one to, like, be able to share with people, and then I realized, like, at a certain point that most people weren't gonna make it past seeing the cover, and I was like, "Damn, there needs to be another book that sort of explains this in a simpler way that doesn't, that isn't, like, such a bummer, so to speak, to some of the AGPs."
better propaganda.
Right, exactly. I needed
In
to
in a
yeah.
descriptively neutral sense, like the word
Yeah, no,
propaganda, like
absolutely. It needed a more, memetically viable delivery than was
uh-huh.
being done, and so I did yeah, I tried to do that where, um it made it more emotionally palatable, but also shorter sentences, clearer sentences. Um,
Yeah, I
you
can't
lose
write
some of
like
the
that.
detail
I
when
can't
you
write
sort of
like
do
that.
that. Huh?
I cannot write like that.
No, I know, I know. Like, some of my favorite posts of yours are actually, like, the ones that are just, like, a few hundred words.
Uh-huh.
Like, like, your psychology is about invalidating people's identities post is, like, excellent.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I know you can't write like that, but I I don't naturally write like that, I just kept editing until it looked like that. I
Hmm.
read books about how to write short in the American style, and I did it. Um, And yeah, time will tell like how influential the book is. Um, uh, yeah, I just think that the sort of argument I make in the book that it's an epistemic injustice that people with this orientation don't get a fair shot at learning about it. Say like in sex ed, as you've proposed on your blog.
Yeah.
Um, it just I think those of us who go through these feelings, we deserve to be treated as humans that can handle hearing the truth, especially because there's such if you do transition, that is a very like serious kind of adult decision. Like
Yeah.
we deserve to be treated seriously and told what is real so that we can make sense of reality and decide how we want to live in it.
And like this utter tragedy of this culture, like I think it makes people into like worse people of like
Yes.
of like being committed, being like, because again, like, you know, in the words of J.K. Rowling, you know, call yourself what you want, wear what you like. I would add, you know, modify your body how you like, but like being committed to this particular ontology of gender, and like in a way that like shuts out like the various situations in which people need to use the sex, have like legitimate reasons for wanting to use the sex-based ontology without worrying about whether it might trigger someone's dysphoria. Like that's just no way to live. Like maybe you know there's a way to live in the world as it exists with the technology that we actually have.
Yeah. I I hope for that sort of an outcome too, where like I obviously want transsexuals to be able to live in society as the gender they aspire to and to be able to have access to the medical care. Um
I mean,
I yeah.
there's also this there's also kind of this funny aspect of like, you know, I keep like wanting to like put emphasis on like, look, I'm not, you know, I don't do policy. If you want to transition and like you know what you're getting into, like I don't want to say that, I don't want to like have definitive policy decisions on how other people should live their lives, because you know that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get the facts. But like there is like clearly this element of like if you have to round me into the trans activist camp or the gender critical camp, like it's pretty clear that like I don't know.
Like ontologically which camp you're in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I
I
think
mean,
there
yeah.
does seem to be this phenomenon among like people who transition first and then learn about the two typology and then like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like it seems like if you, I suspect there's a real effect that if you teach those people about the typology first, they don't end up transitioning, because transition, like given current technology where you can't just like magically grow a new body in a vat and swap your brain into it, like transitioning makes a lot more sense if you actually believe in gender identity. Whereas like if you don't have that belief in the first place, I think a lot of people are more likely to do the thing that you and I are doing, which is like, okay, just live with it. Just live
Yeah.
with being
Like
male.
I I would agree that like if more people had heard the typology before transitioning, it might lead to overall fewer transitions. But I think there would still be some people who hear about the typology and then realize that their sort of transsexual feelings aren't going to be able to go away, and they might transition earlier.
Yeah.
Um, and but I do think there's probably a thing where people who learn the typology first, um, they're probably more likely to decide not to transition than people who only hear about the gender identity theory. And yeah, but to be clear, like the reason I don't transition it's just because of my physical situation. If I
Yeah.
thought I'd be able to be somewhat passable, I'd probably be doing it. But
Okay.
yeah, it's just like a realistic, pragmatic appraisal of my situation.
Yeah. How tall are you?
6'4".
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Great.
yeah. I'm taller than the average man to the degree that the average man is taller than the average woman. Like,
Yeah.
I'm the true third gender, right?
Uh-huh.
um, so yeah, it's just about being realistic for me personally. But um, yeah, why, if you don't mind me asking, like, why have you? Um, did we already cover that? Like, why you chose not to
I mean,
pursue?
I sort of chickened out for like just medical uncertainty. So like, okay, sorry, I'm a transhumanist in theory, but like in practice, there's just like I'm just wary that I'm wary about permanent. I'm wary about unnecessary medical interventions because like so much, there's so much we just don't know about biology.
Yeah,
Like we know enough. Okay, we know enough. Like vaccines. It's not like someone like actually like knows how to engineer nanobots that specifically kill the disease. Like vaccines are like injecting a weakened form of the disease into your body and like letting your immune system figure it out. You know. And so like there's just this sort of general unease that like okay, we can make artificial hormones. You inject artificial female hormones into a male body. Is that going to break stuff if you keep doing it over a long period of time?
yeah. No, that's a
Maybe.
fair concern. That's also another
I
concern I
mean,
would
and
have
like
too.
again, like I know that like this has been studied somewhat. There are definitely people doing it. Like we know it doesn't immediately kill you because there are lots of people who do it, who have done it and are living happy lives for decades and decades. But like could it be breaking things steadily in a way that like makes the benefit not worth the cost? You know, like I'm pretty wary about that.
Right. Yeah.
And also just not passing. Like I'm only 5'11", but like okay, medical conservatism and not passing and just like I just don't believe any of this shit.
Right. Well, I mean, even if you didn't believe it, you could still
Yeah.
think, "Oh, I'm gonna take this because I want to look more feminine."
Yeah. And I mean you know, I did get laser on my face. It didn't the laser wasn't that effective. But like I did try to get facial hair reduction. I like my beautiful, beautiful ponytail, even though that, you know, hair length is not actually sexually dimorphic and that's just a cultural convention. I'm kind of like the effects that hormones did have on my body that was permanent. Like I feel okay about it. So like I'm I have accepted I've accepted the world what is available to me in the world as it is.
Yeah, which is,
And
I think, a great place to come to.
you know if you know we get like you know if like superhuman artificial intelligence invents a way to like actually grow a new female body in a vat, then I think I would go for that. But like, you know, at that point, like humanity has much bigger problems,
Right.
which is not the subject of this podcast.
Right. And I mean, at that point, they probably will have already figured out how to alter the sort of internalization mechanism that seems to happen with autosexuality and sort of,
Yeah, but you don't.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be cured though, right? Like if you could cure autogynephilia, like okay, I would rather have the magical body transformation than be cured and just be an ordinary man. But like if there were a cure, I wouldn't take it. I think I like being I like being the way I am, even though being the way I am in this world like necessarily entails like knowing that there are some possible nice things that you can't have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like you've come to a pretty good place of acceptance of
Yeah.
your situation, which I I would love for more autogynephilic individuals to arrive at that, regardless of their state of transition, but just
Yeah.
like understand their situation and reality.
I think
Um,
that's a good place to wrap it up.
yeah, no, yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. So yeah, thanks for coming on my channel,
Yeah. Thanks for
Zach.
having me on the show.
And I would like to mention again to the viewers, and I'll put it in the description, that he blogs about this stuff at unremediatedgender.space, and it's a great blog.
Yeah. In retrospect, it may not have been the best idea for like the blog title and the
No,
URL to be so different because like no one remembers the title.
no, no. Only your diehard fans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.